Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of But First She Failed podcast. I am so excited to be back, guys. I know you may have noticed that last week we actually didn't put out an episode. I want to say I'm so sorry that I didn't put out an episode. It's real life. What happened was we got hit with the flu A. And let me tell you, it knocked me out. It knocked me out. It knocked out my kids, my mom. My husband somehow didn't get it by the grace of God, but it was a really, really rough 2 weeks actually. Like today's day 15. You can probably hear my voice. I'm not 100%, but I'm so excited to be back. And, I'm excited to dive into this episode. So, getting into today's episode, if you remember listening to the last episode from 2 weeks ago, we actually talked about how to supercharge your 2025 so you can have the best, most productive year yet. That sounds great in theory, but what happens when like real life happens, or what happens when goals are overwhelming, it feels like a lot, or what happens when, or why is it that we don't get to our goals? Usually one of the biggest factors of why we don't do that is because we don't take our goals, our yearly goals, and make them into smaller goals that are less overwhelming, more manageable, more bite-sized, and just a better overall strategy to get there, right? So if it was easy to get to your goals, then we would all accomplish all of our goals every single year, and that is not the case. If you're anything like me, you sometimes have goals for many years, or sometimes you finally, start getting to them, but maybe you fall off track, and there's a lot of things that can happen. But creating quarterly goals is a great hack on how to really take something that can be overwhelming and really make it more practical for real life and for getting you there to your goals. So that's it. Let's dive into it. We are talking about 6 ways to set and achieve your quarterly goals like a boss. Number one is you go through your calendar and plot out the end of the quarter in your calendar. And that sounds kind of weird. Like, why would you do that? But it's really a sobering thing to do. I did it, and let me tell you, I was like, oh my gosh. Sometimes we think we have all the time in the world to do a yearly goal, or when we like the beginning of the year, the end of the year seems so far away. But when we take time to really go and like figure out like, okay, when is the end of each quarter? And like, let me break down my goals into quarterly goals. And you actually see the actual dates and you put it on your calendar. Something is very sobering about that, right? So for example, I looked up the end of the quarters, and it's the 31st of March, June 30th, September 30th, and of course the 31st of December. That is the end of each quarter from the first to the fourth quarter of this year. But seeing that, it's like, oh my gosh, March 31st is not that far away, right? And if we want to get to our goals, it's really important that we see the date and we know, like, okay, if I have my yearly goals, I need to break that out into smaller pieces, and I need to accomplish like part one of that by the 31st, right? This is so helpful in really like getting you on your goals and just kind of reassessing and getting you going, right? So that is number one. Number two is once you have that, you open up your goals and your yearly goals, the ones that you dreamt up. If you haven't, I want you to stop on this podcast, this episode, and I want you to go back to the last episode because we really do a deep, deep dive. And it's a beautiful episode where we talk about how to cast your vision for the year, how to dream big, and how to have the best year yet. So if you haven't, I want you to if you haven't listened to it yet, I want you to go back and listen to that now. But basically you go through, step two is you go through the year, and then you go through your goals, and now you kind of create SMART goals, right? But in a SMART goals is what we talked about in the last episode. So remember, that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals. And now you did that for the year in the previous episode, but now you're going to do the same theory, but you're going to apply it to quarterly goals, right? So if you have like this audacious goal of like writing a book this year, then you're going to say, okay, that means that every single quarter, I'm going to write 5 chapters or whatever. You figure kind of out like, okay, or that means I need to get an editor, or I don't know anything about this world, so clearly you can tell. But it's kind of a way of like setting your goals for in a smaller, like a big ambitious goal into smaller chunks that makes sense for the quarter, right? So like, what do you have to do in quarter one to get to quarter two, and how do you get to a successful quarter four, right? So that is like, you take it and you create SMART goals. You did that for the yearly goals, but now you're going to do that into even more concise way and do it for your quarterly goals, right? And again, SMART goals, and that's going to make it less overwhelming. It's going to be make it more attainable. You're going to go for it more. So you break that down, right? Number 3 is you create the systems and you plug it in. I talked in the last episode about how systems are so important, and I've just like love systems now, and I go into that in the last episode. But similarly to your yearly goals, like now you need to break it down, but you need to create the systems systems around it, right? Like, what are the systems that are going to make me successful in this quarter, right? What does that look like? That is your weekly to-dos. Like, what are your weekly to-dos in order to get to your goals? You have to figure out what are your weekly to-dos and then create a category for that. And what are your monthly to-dos, right? Like, but you can take your goals, right? And you can, for example, one of my goals that I talked about that I identified in the last episode was that I want to lose the 20 pounds of postpartum weight that I have from my two kids from the last 5 years. And a way to lose the 20 pounds, if I apply this of like breaking it down into quarterly goals, that means I should probably be, so it's not an overwhelming thing at the end of the year. I'm trying to lose 20 pounds in 1 month and it's like unhealthy. What I should be doing is I should be losing 5 pounds every single quarter, right? And being that said, it's like, okay, that means that by March 31st, ideally, I should have lost 5 pounds, right? So now this is the beginning of February or mid-February, actually. This year has gone by so quickly. But now it's like, okay, if that's my goal, like I need to get on it. Like I need to start being more focused on that. Like, what do I need to do in order to like by March 31st be in a better place and like just lose that weight? Not in a quick, I'm just gonna drink water for 2 days so I hit the goal. No, in like a consistent, healthy way that makes sense. That's gonna keep it off, right? So that's a way of kind of creating like, okay, that's the goal for the quarter, like 5 pounds per quarter. But also now you're going to take it a step further and create your weekly to do. So what does that look like? Okay, that means like I need to, go to the gym 4 times this week. Like I need to, every single week, I need to look at my calendar and I need to plot in 4 times that I'm going to go to the gym, right? Because that's going to help me get there. Or that looks like I need to start meal prepping or I need to start cooking at home instead of eating out because that's going to help me get there, right? So that just knowing that, like knowing what your quarterly goals really helps you kind of be really excellent with like how you steward your time and how you steward all the things to get you there, right? So like I'm going to eat at home more. I'm going to go to the gym 4 times a week. So there's like multiple things at bay when you know like, okay, this is my goal, my smaller goal for the quarter, right? Another ambitious goal that I have is to get 500,000 downloads, like 500,000 downloads. Like that's a very audacious and ambitious goal for me, but it's something that, that I believe that I can do. I believe God can do it, and I'm really hoping for that. And so even if I don't get there, my gosh, if I get 250,000 downloads this year or 300,000 downloads this year, that's still a great like goal to have, right? So it's like I created this ambitious goal, but now I have to identify, okay, if I want to get to this audacious goal, what are the steps that I need to take on a weekly and a monthly basis for my quarterly goals? So a weekly goal is to create a video podcast every single week, which is ironic that I'm recording this right now. And it's like, okay, God, because I literally just told you guys in the beginning of this episode that I missed last week's episode, which was my goal to not miss any episodes, but I was just so sick, right? And real life happens. And that's actually going to be step number 6. I'm going to talk about that, like what to do when that happens. But for example, like I had set out like every single week, I want to do a video podcast. I want to do a podcast and a video podcast for every single week in order to hopefully get me to that goal that I have for the end of the year, right? What is a monthly goal? So monthly goals look like, what does that look like for me? It's like I've identified, I used to do a weekly newsletter for the podcast, right? The But First She Failed Insiders, a weekly email. And then I just had to come to terms with like, it's just too much for me in the season. Like I do not have a full schedule to work on the things that I want to work on. My youngest daughter is not in school yet. She's not in daycare or anything like that. So it's really difficult for me to find the hours to record and to work on things without being interrupted. And that being said, what's realistic for me in the season as a monthly to do, that's still going to get me there, but it's a monthly to do, was creating this newsletter as a monthly thing. And so it's going to be more value driven. It's going to be less frequent, but I'm going to really be able to pour in a lot of energy and time and make sure that it has a lot of value, right? So sometimes you have to figure out, okay, what is a weekly goal in order for when I look at my yearly and quarterly goals, like what is a weekly goal and what's a monthly goal, right? And really start kind of planning those in and plopping those in. Another weekly thing that we decided that as a family, or another vision that we planned, is that we really for 2025 want to be really intentional about our kids, about creating special moments. Like we used to do that a couple years ago. Last year we didn't do the best about that, about going to the farm and going to the safari and going to a zoo or doing different cool activities with our kids, like the museum and things like that. We didn't do a great job last year. So we identified that a way that we can accomplish that this year is by setting a monthly goal of having a monthly family outing outing where we do something really fun, and we put rules around it. We said it's not going to be a park in our suburb, in our area. It's not going to be a birthday party for someone else. It's going to be, us being intentional about taking our kids to a different place that's a fun, memorable place for all of us, right? And so we've identified like, okay, this month is a crazy month for us. This weekend's really crazy for us, but next weekend we have some more bandwidth. So next week we plopped in, okay, we're going to do our tentative family plans. Like, what does that look like? We'll figure it out when we get there. But that's a way of taking your like vision for the year, making it more practical and putting it into your calendar. Which leads me to number 4, which is actually plug it into your calendar, right? We live by our calendars. I live by my calendar, right? On my phone. We have shared calendars, my husband and I, and that's how we get organized with like everything, all of our commitments, our extracurriculars for the kids, his personal stuff, my personal stuff. Like we just kind of put everything on a calendar where, even our time blocks, we put it in there. And it really helps us be like organized and accomplish all the things that we have to do, everything that's on our plate, right? And I actually suggest this. It's something that we learned when we took a course called Systemize Our Life. And that's from a previous guest from the podcast, Chelsea Jo Moore. I really recommend going back to episode 113. That's Chelsea Jo Moore. She created this course called Systemize Your Life. And it's really like a time management system thing. We took it a few years ago, and that's what taught us how to do this whole shared calendar thing and among many other things. And it was so helpful to us, and I highly recommend it. She talks more at length about it in episode 113. So if you want to go back and listen, I really encourage you to systemize your life. And when I say that, what I mean is, like, for example, what does that look like? Systemizing our life for me and my husband means every Sunday we have designated, or we've decided that we're going to sit down. We're going to open up our calendars, our phones. We're going to go over the commitments that we have for that week so we can know, like, hey, just so you know, on Thursday night, he's going to play tennis. He'll tell me, or I'll say, hey, just so you know, on Friday night, I am going to, it's so-and-so, I'm going to go to grab dinner with my friend, or on Tuesday, we have a birthday party, or on Saturday, we have so-and-so's birthday party for, their child. So it's just really a way of kind of, getting organized with our time. And I highly recommend it that you do that every single week, because that way you can plop down, like, there's things like your, bedtime routines, your morning time routines. You can block off your time, but it's also important because Chelsea Jo teaches you, like, what are the essential things that you need to do? What are the foundational things for you to be the best version of you, right? So for example, you can imagine, like, the difference. There's weeks where it's like everything goes like according to plan. You accomplish so much. It's an excellent week. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm on top of the world. I'm crushing life. And then there's weeks where like nothing goes the way you want it to go. Like you don't get your, workout in, you don't get your time with God, or you don't like have that time with your husband, whatever that looks like, whatever the things that you identify as foundational things for you to have a good week, you don't get to them. And they're very different weeks. And a lot of times you accomplish more and you can do a lot more, I would say, when you do those foundational things that make you the best version of you, so that you can execute all the things on your plate, right? And so Chelsea Jo talks about that in her course, where she talks about, like, what are the foundational things, like, to be the best version of you. Like for me, I've identified, like, I need a coffee date like once a month. Like I need to have like interaction. I need to be social. Like I'm a very social person, and it's like I need to get with friends. Like if I go 3 months and I don't talk to any friends or get together with any friends, like that's not good for me, right? Like I know, so I'm trying to be more intentional about that. I know that moving my body and working out really helps me. And so what does that look like? How do I get to the gym so that I can show up better, have more energy for all the other things, right? So it's really kind of a way to like choose and design your weeks, because you can either live a life of default or by design, right? And this is really a way that you design and plug in the things that you've identified as important for getting to your quarterly goals, but also your wellness and all the things, and like organizing and taking charge of your week and knowing like this is the week that I want. This is where I'm going to place all the things that I've already identified as really important to me, right? So plugging it into your calendar is super important, right? Getting all the things done, everything that you want. It's just essential, right? So like I mentioned, this is like where you put all the things, like I want to do a coffee date with a friend. I want to, do a date night. I want to do 2 date nights with my husband every single month. So like what days are we doing that? Like when are we doing that so that we accomplish like a healthy like rhythm for dates, right? So that is, plugging into your calendar is essential. So that is number 4. Number 5 is you set meetings with yourself to review your quarterly progress. This is something, if I'm being honest, I'm experimenting with. I've never actually done this before, but I read about it and I thought it was such a cool idea. And I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to do this, right? So basically, like I said in the first step, I went ahead and I put it on my calendar, like when is end of each quarter. And a week before that, I set a date with myself where I'm like, I'm going to make sure that week I'm I'm going to take some time out. I put a tentative time already on my calendar for me to take time to like review my stuff, review the progress, right? Because the reality is one of the most underutilized things that we do is reflection, right? Like reflection is so crucial, right? Sometimes we can get into the habit of working, doing all the things, but we don't take the time to reflect, to pause and reflect and be like, is this really serving me? Am I happy? Am I frustrated? What am I frustrated about? Why am I frustrated? Why am I feeling this way? Right. And so reflection is just such a key element of like living a healthy and well balanced life and living a purpose filled life, right? If you are not regularly pausing to reflect on your goals, regularly pausing to reflect on like life and your rhythms and all the things, you're going to really find that quickly you're going to be unhappy, right? You're going to be not so happy with everything going on in your life. You're going to maybe over index on work, or you're going to over index on like wellness and not like accomplish your goals or fun and not, it's just, it's hard, right? Life is never going to be a perfect balance, but if you're constantly like checking, pausing and reflecting, then it's going to be healthier because you can see like, hey, I went hard with the fun in February. Hey, March I'm going to recalibrate a little bit and focus a little bit more on my goals. Or I went so hard on my goals in January, but you know what? I didn't spend any time with family. I didn't call family. I didn't see any friends. I'm feeling very like lonely. Like let me prioritize spending time with the loved ones, right? So pausing and reflecting is so important. And that's why I put the meeting to review your quarterly progress and as a meeting with yourself, because guess what? You can go back and see like on the 31st of March or whatever, whichever quarter, you can stop and see like, man, I did so good with my, my projects, the projects that I'm working on, my side projects, or I did so good with work. I crushed it. I'm about to get that promotion that I really want, or my business, like I crushed it with my business, but my relationships didn't do so good, or vice versa. I did amazing. I was so intentional with my kids. I did all the things. I was intentional with friends, but you know what? I did not move an inch when it comes to my personal projects, right? And so like, let me focus a little bit more of my time and energy on that, right? So that is number 5. That is, set meetings with yourself to review your quarterly process and progress. And I think that that's so important. Number 6, I think, is my favorite. Number 6 is give yourself grace because life happens. When I originally wrote the script, like I did not have this number 6. I just like threw it in today actually because I wrote this about a month ago and I was like, wow, God, this is how funny how literally I was like, your quarterly goals. My quarterly goal is like I have to put out a video podcast every single week. And then last week I didn't even put out a podcast at all, like not even on Apple anywhere. And for me, it's of course like life happens. Like we got the flu. We all got the flu, right? And I could sit and beat myself up because man, I should have had more episodes pre-recorded before I got sick or before I launched my podcast in case this happened. It looks so unprofessional. Like those are a lot of the mindsets and a lot of things that like I have to combat, right? And maybe you're like me. Maybe you think like, dang, like you beat yourself up when you fall off track with your goals. But that's why this step is so important, because it's like you really can't. Because why? Because when you spend a lot of time beating yourself up or being frustrated or complaining or with the self-pity, it doesn't help you and it doesn't help anyone, because literally you're just draining your energy, you're draining your focus, instead of taking that time to pause and go back to, the goals and get back on track. You're draining yourself and you're putting yourself more at a deficit to start back up on what you need to start, right? And so again, like I thought that this was so important to give yourself grace, because like life happens, right? And you can beat yourself up, you can be so frustrated about it, but it's not helping you. It's not helping you in any way to do that. So the healthiest thing that you can do when you fall off track, if this is you, if you've already, we're in February and you already fell off your goals that you set in the beginning of the year or the end of last year, it's okay. Get back on it when you can, right? When the time is right, when you can, you get back on it and you just go, right? There's no rules. Like people aren't watching you as closely as you think they are. I think so often we think like the world is watching and I messed up, or I didn't go to the gym this week. Like, oh my God, I already fell off. That's okay. Like stuff happens, but get back on as soon as you can, get back on and just go for it, right? Because it's not a contest. You're not competing against anyone else, just yourself. You're trying to be the best version of yourself, right? And so if for my case, let's take it back to the case of like not putting out an episode last week. If I can still produce like, I forget how many weeks there are in a year. I don't know, 52 weeks a year. If I can still put out a new episode 50 weeks out of the year, great. I'm so much closer to the goal that I started off in the beginning of the year. And I'm going to give myself grace for that. So I say this with love, that, let's stop the complaining. Let's stop the self pity and the bitterness, and let's be gentle with ourselves and just be like, okay, I, I stumbled a little bit. That's okay. I'm going to get back up and I'm going to go, right? Because that is what makes a person successful. Like I feel like every single person that I've ever had on the podcast, the guests, which they'll be coming back soon. We're going to start having guests soon. But the more and more I see, it's like, no, they just have, they overcome obstacles faster, right? So let's be great about like not beating ourselves up, not being frustrated, but getting back up when something is thrown at us, when a situation happens, when the kids get sick, when you fall off track for whatever reason, when work is really demanding and all of a sudden your side project, your side business got put on hold completely, or when you're just so discouraged that you just cannot find the energy or the courage or the motivation to do the things that you want to do. That's okay. You just got to work back to get into that place where you do the thing, right? So anyways, there you have it. That is 6 steps for setting and achieving your quarterly goals like the boss that you are. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the But First She Failed podcast. I hope to see you next time.